Many years ago, a movie came out called As Good as It Gets. And I remember it still, because it was a good movie with much to say to us in today's world. The main character is a writer who's absolutely obsessive in his attempts to control his life and what happens to him. He sees the world outside his apartment as a place that is filled with constant threat and danger, and he is desperate to keep himself safe. Germs lurk everywhere. Disaster is ready, always ready to pounce, and chaos is always just around the corner. He lives alone, and he has no friends, and that's the way he wants it. Other people, relationships, only bring demands and trouble, disrupt routines and resist control, and he wants none of it. To maintain control, he keeps his apartment ordered to a very precise layout. Everything has its place and must not be disturbed. His writing table must be arranged in a certain way, the pencils and paper lined up just so. He also follows a series of unvarying rituals day after day. When he ventures out for a meal, he always goes to the same restaurant, taking great care as to how he walks along the sidewalk, stepping here but not there, avoiding contact with other people, maneuvering his way around and through the crowds. At the restaurant, his silverware must be laid out in a certain pattern. The same waitress must serve him. His order must be taken and served in a prescribed way. Any deviation enrages him. He wears gloves when he goes out, and yet still, when he returns home, he immediately makes his way to the bathroom to scrub his hands, careful not to touch anything until his hands are clean. The vanity over his bathroom sink is stacked high with bottles of antibacterial soap. Each time he washes his hands, he uses one bottle and then discards it, and the water must be scalding hot. When he cannot avoid encountering people, he says cruel and hateful things to them to keep them away. He is determined to control the uncertainties in his life and the world. And while his rituals help, he remains a terrified man who never lets his guard down. Little by little, however, the world finds its way to him. A neighbor whom he detests is injured, and suddenly the neighbor's dog, which he also detests, is forced on him. The dog slowly softens, and he even comes to like the dog. The neighbor as well gradually becomes part of his world as the neighbor falls on hard times, and he starts to feel something of compassion for the man. But the one who gets to him the most is the waitress who serves him at the restaurant every day. He likes her, and when he discovers that her small child is in need of medical attention, which she cannot afford, he arranges for the best doctor in New York to treat him. He and the waitress draw closer, and he even risks a relationship with her. As he allows himself to feel something of love and dares to venture out into the world a little more, his desperate need to control his life and the world diminishes somewhat, and he comes to trust a bit, before when he could never trust at all. But at the end of the movie, you realize that his need remains. His compulsions still drive him. He'll never feel safe or be able to fully trust, and will never be free from his ritual of control. He'll never know much life or joy. Terrified of the world and what happens, afraid of the very things that give life and joy, needing to retreat into his own world, fleeting happiness, occasionally alive but mostly dead. That's as good as it gets for him, as good as it will ever get. And while you and I might see ourselves to be very different from him, perhaps we can relate to him more than we care to admit. Because we too often feel a desperate need to control life and the world and all that happens. We might not quite be as obsessive or compulsive as he was, but we do have our ways. We do have our ways. There's There's just so much that seems out of control in our world today. We turn on the news and hear a never-ending litany of war, violence, crime, hatred, senseless death. And we wonder, what is this world coming to? But it's not only the world, it's our personal lives as well. Some illness or disease strikes us or a friend, or suddenly the job is gone, or tragedy comes to us. And it is frightening. We can become so afraid for ourselves and those we love. So we do everything we can to control what happens and keep chaos at bay. And you think about it, so much today has to do with control. While the emphasis on diet and nutrition and exercise is good and necessary, you get the feeling that for many the issue is not healthy living, but believing that they can make themselves immune, live forever, and control what happens to them. And there's the belief that the right neighborhood, the right school, the right friends, all of it, can keep the children safe from the chaos that threatens them. And book after book advises people how to be in control of everything. And especially as religious people, do we have our ways and rituals. They come to believe that if we are good, then bad things won't happen to us. God won't allow them to happen to us. Like arranging silverware in a certain way, we try to arrange our lives in a way that will guarantee God's protection. Or we arrange our understanding of the world in a certain way. We see the world in terms of good guys and bad guys. Makes us feel safe knowing who is who. And we believe that if we associate with the good guys and shun the bad guys, elect the good guys and defeat the bad guys, then our world will be safe. Or we explain the world and life in terms of God and Satan, seeing things as being either God's will or the hand of Satan. Of course, often our rituals don't work, and our understanding and sense of control is shattered. Bad things happen to good people. The good guys turn out to be the bad guys. What we thought to be of God is not of God at all. And what then? Well, what many religious people do today is despair and retreat into themselves. And one form of this despair is heard in all the talk about the end of the world. Things are so bad, it is said the end must be near. And there are actually those who look forward to it. But such belief is in fact often despair. Despair over God's power to redeem His word. And so people retreat into themselves, see no need to serve others, because after all, it's hopeless. Another form of despair is seen in those who pursue their own personal salvation and turn inward in an attempt to feel closer to God. Jesus seems to have come for their sake and for their sake alone, not for the word's sake. This too is despair over God's power to work a new world. For many, that's as good as it gets, able to manage the world a bit, but still the desperate need to control, to arrange things in a comforting way, retreat, escape, and little hope, little life or joy. And is that as good as it gets? Well, in our first lesson for today, Isaiah proclaims, no, there's another way. But it's a scary way because it calls for a faith that pushes our understanding of God beyond all the comfortable limits we've established for God. And scary too because it means giving up our illusions of control and actually trusting God, being open to God like never before. But it's also the way of life and hope. And so what is this other way? Well, to understand that, we need to back up a bit. At the time of Isaiah, many of the people of Israel were held captive and exiled in Babylon. They were devastated by their defeat at the hands of the Babylonians. They felt abandoned by God. In their arrogance, they had believed that God would never allow such a thing to happen to His own people. Yet it did happen. And now Cyrus and the Persian Empire were on the move, threatening Babylon. This was even more terrifying for the Israelites. Another foreign power, another godless nation, was about to enslave them. All was chaos for Israel. and all their attempts to control and understand what had happened had failed. And so they gave themselves up to despair. But in the midst of it all, Isaiah proclaimed that God was still in control. Babylon, in fact, had been God's instrument. God had used Babylon to bring Israel to its knees in order to save it from destroying itself. Through Babylon, even through the people's pain, God had been working to deliver. And now Isaiah proclaims that Cyrus shall be God's instrument of deliverance, a foreign ruler who didn't even know that. What Isaiah proclaims is that God is a God who forms not just light, but creates darkness as well. Not only weal or well-being, but woe. And it was a stunning, utterly new proclamation, because up to this point, the people believed that God had created only light, only well-being and goodness. And now Isaiah is saying that God created the darkness and the woe Israel experienced. And even more stunning is that Isaiah proclaims that the very darkness and woe was meant to lead to deliverance, to new hope. For Isaiah, there was no devil, no scorecard of good guys and bad guys. There was only God, the creator and Lord of all things. It was a breathtaking way of seeing things, a breathtaking faith that saw God beyond human control and pushed God beyond the limits of the people's neat systems of understanding. But is Isaiah saying that God creates all tragedy and disaster? No. Isaiah was speaking to Israel's particular situation at a particular time, not making a universal proclamation for all situations in all times. And yet still, Isaiah can say something to us. Say that maybe God can be found at times where we would never think to look, in darkness and in trouble. Or say that maybe there are times when God is trying to bring us to our knees, bring us to our senses, in order to save us from ourselves and our own self-destruction. And maybe there are times when the darkness and trouble is God's doing because, given our arrogance and propensity for self-deception, it is the only way God can get us to see the light and have life. At the very least, what Isaiah is saying is that God is beyond our control and our neat systems and can use anything or anyone to work his purpose of life. An author relates a passage from the classic children's book, The Lion, the Witch, and the Warden. Now in the book, a large lion named Aslan pads around the edges of the story, appearing at strategic moments to save 4 lost children from danger and to guide them home. Hearing about him for the first time from a couple of friendly beavers, the children have doubts about whether they are looking forward to meeting him. Is he quite safe? Asks one of the girls. I should feel rather nervous, I think, about meeting a lion. Ah, that you will, dearie. Make no mistake, says Mrs. Beaver. If there's anyone who can appear before Aslan without their knees knocking, they're either braver than most or else just silly. Then he isn't safe, said Lucy. Safe, said Mr. Beaver. Don't you hear what Mrs. Beaver tells you? Who said anything about being safe? Of course he isn't safe. But he's good. He's the king, I tell you. And the author comments, it is a statement of faith based on experience. The king is not safe. The king is sovereign, which means that he is frightened because his subjects have no control. He does not ask for their advice before he acts. He is no one's pet. His rescue of them may be as hair-raising as what he is rescuing them from. But he is good, which means he can be trusted. And if they will just press through their fear of him, he will save them. If they will just climb on his back as he tells them to, and hang on for dear life, he will carry them home. The author goes on then to say, believing in the God of the Bible calls for the same kind of faith. While there is plenty for us to fear, there is also plenty for us to hope. The God who does not break promises can go on, can be trusted, to go on creating a world out of darkness and chaos, putting breath into our dust and dry bones, turning our lives and best inside out in order to set us free. We may not always approve of God's methods, but fortunately, our approval is not required. God will save us anyhow, if we will just stay out of the way. And that is what Isaiah said. God is not safe, but God is good. God will do frightening and hair-raising things to rescue us and to lead us home, lead us to life. And instead of trying to control this God, instead of always letting our need to understand get in the way, we are to trust this God. Trust that God will work life and hope out of all things, and hang on for dear life. And yes, such faith is a scary faith. But this scary faith will give us the strength to live in a scary world with hope. Even take on human evil and combat suffering and help God work a new kind of world. It is a faith that can bring us out of hiding, out of despair, and make us true servants who live out the gospel. Without such a faith, I'm afraid that sporadic happiness and much fear is about as good as it gets. With such faith, things can be so much better. Really, there's just no telling how good they can get. Amen.
Amen.